All right, so I'm going to give you a bunch of more hints about the test and do a few things more like review each, prepare for the actual exam itself on tonight at 6 o'clock. And I will go through any question you have, anything, literally, about life in general, you know, anything. I'll answer it all. And so it's a really good opportunity. 6 o'clock, so a little before 6, I'll have that open. You can come down here. And I know there's other things going on. I will record it, but it really does help. You can come to those. And I tried to get as far as I could in class. I didn't quite make it, so there's a few things on page 10 I did not quite get to, but you know what? I tried. I did the best I could. So the few things you might have to either get for yourselves and or ask at the review session. Speaking of that, are there any questions on the sheet? And in fact, I'll answer things from page 10 if you want. Yeah. I can, but I won't. Anything else? Yes. Page 1, New England economies. The New England economy. And the big thing about the New England economy was it was much more diversified than the Southern economies. So it's much more involving trade, merchant class, and it especially relied on shipping, relied on, what are the words I'm looking for? Oh, the fur trade. Much more diversified. And small farms, because it's just different terrain. And so it wasn't as good for plantation and therefore slavery. And that's part of the reason why the New England economy, there'll be more immigrants will go to the north than the south after the Revolutionary War. Yes.
Can you do the Filipino?
Page 6? Yes. The Filipino insurrection, page 6. That's after the Treaty of Paris. The United States got the Philippines as a colony. And the Filipinos revolted under Emilio Aguinaldo, but they revolted against the United States rule. And this would turn into a bloody guerrilla fight, where the United States would do many of the same things that the Spanish did in Cuba, including waterboarding, water torture, and concentration camps. And eventually, an agreement would be made where the U.S. would leave, but it convinced America that colonial imperialism was far too expensive in lives and treasure. But we would focus on economic imperialism. Yeah. Slash what? Mahan, yeah. Alfred Thayer Mahan. So imperialism, remember, imperialism is empire for profit. And the United States had this imperialist wave. And the big reasons were, part of it was Alfred Thayer Mahan would write a book called The Influence of Sea Power, where all great powers had to have an empire and trade, and therefore we needed a navy. So Mahan would write this book saying, we need a powerful navy to protect our trade, and therefore we need an empire. But the other reasons was, for this, I'm not going to go through every one, but the other reasons were the bad economy, the panic of 1893. The thought was we need to sell our surplus. Empires are captive market. And another big reason we have to get is social Darwinism. Social Darwinism was becoming dominant. And the idea that these inferior civilizations need to be dominated and led by the superior ones. And this was, of course, by color of skin. And so therefore, this would justify people of majority European ancestry conquering people who are not, by saying that we're superior. Oh, and they would call it white man's burden. White man's burden. Yes. So that's 1898. And the U.S. has had their eyes on Cuba for a long time. It was a Spanish colony. And so we used, and this would be the era of, during the Cuban Revolution, there'd be yellow journalism. Do I have yellow journalism on here? Yeah, yellow journalism where they would exaggerate the threat of war. But then when the Maine was exploded, the Maine blew up in Havana Harbor, McKinley would use it as an excuse to ask Congress for a declaration of war. And the Spanish were defeated fairly fast in Cuba. But the United States would also scoop up Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. And that would lead directly to the Platt and Teller amendments and the Philippine insurrection. Or the Treaty of Paris would end the war. Do I have that on there? Yeah. I do, good. Yeah, cool. So on page 10, Stokely Carmichael and Black Power. What was happening there was beginning to be a lot of people wanting civil rights. Were getting tired of this slow action of the movement of civil disobedience. And so men like Stokely Carmichael wanted not only more direct action, which might include more violent action, they also wanted the civil rights movement to really emphasize the idea that being black was equal, and black was beautiful. And so they called it black consciousness. And we must embrace the fact that there are different colored skins, and there's nothing unequal about having different colored skins. And so we must embrace black. So that's where you get like a combination of clothing and cultural enhancement of try to remember the African heritage. For example, you get everything from kind of the new holiday celebration called Kwanzaa to Afro hairstyles to try to act to say black was beautiful. I should add, this is going to lead to a huge backlash by whites. Huge. Yeah. Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, and it's on page 41. 4?
Yeah, 4.
Page 4. Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, 1848, that ended the Mexican War, and that's one where the United States got the Rio Grande as the border of Texas, got New Mexico and California, and paid $15 million for it. So we could say it wasn't a war of conquest, even though it's clearly a war of conquest. And so the big thing about that would be, first off, it's manifest destiny, but also that would blow up the issue of slavery in the territories. Slavery in that area, California, New Mexico, called the Mexican Cession. The Mexican Cession, and that would lead to the Wilmot Proviso, but the biggie, the Compromise of 1850. And now we couldn't hide from slavery in the territories, which would be the issue that would be the Civil War. Yeah. Say it again. Horizontal and vertical trusts. I could go on through one more time. I think I've answered that like 6 times.
You've answered it twice already.
I'll do it one more time. What the heck, right? No, it's fine. It's just what my memory, I might have also answered it in previous years. So horizontal and vertical trusts, those are 2 different types of monopolies, of combinations of big business to dominate the market. Horizontal was owning all the alike businesses, like Rockefeller owning all the oil refineries. Vertical trust was owning all the means of production, like Carnegie owned everything from the iron mines all the way up to the steel forge, or the iron forges all the way up to the steel production. That's vertical. So those are 2 different ways of monopoly, 2 different ways. Yes. Title IX, Roman numerals. Title IX, adopts of the Educational Act of 1972, and that's on page 10. The Title IX, page 9, it's on page 10, isn't it? Yeah, and that is really big. I know I didn't quite get to it in class. I wanted to, thank you for asking. But that said there would be no discrimination in education. No discrimination on education. And not just based on color of skin, but the big thing was by sex. And so it was routine that males would be in all the honors classes and most degrees would be for men, and women would be focused to other things. Now that cannot happen. And so that Title IX would fold into an increasing desire for an equal rights amendment to finally get rid of that hole in the Constitution. Is that ERA on there too? Yeah. The equal rights amendment that would say no discrimination totally against sex. Put it in the Constitution, because that's not in the Constitution. And it immediately got about 70% of the states. Boom, immediately. It needs 75%. And never got it. And so the Equal Rights Amendment did not pass. Montana has that in the state constitution. So Montana was one of the first states to have it. I bet it wouldn't. Rephrase it. It would. Are there any others? Yeah.
Panic of 1837.
So the Panic of 1837 on page 4. That was the first really big panic, financial panic of the Industrial Revolution. It was worldwide, and it was caused by over-speculation in railroads, but also land speculation. And it was partially triggered by this fuel of Western land taken from Indian removal. I think I forgot. I know I answered that once before, but I think I forgot that part. Fuel of that land. And it's partially also, and the bust happened partially because Andrew Jackson, fearful of this speculation, passed the specie circular that said all government land must be paid for in gold coins. And that dropped the price and popped the bubble. But it also was made worse by the Bank of the United States pulling back money, angry at Jackson. And so the panic would be the first real mass unemployment we've seen. That's never happened before, showing the important how the economy had changed with capitalism. Another one. Oh, I should add, this would really lead to the big free labor, wage slavery argument. Yeah. Okay, détente and SALT 1, that's on page 10. And détente, during the Nixon administration, détente was a lessening of tensions in the Cold War. So Nixon, the rabid Cold Warrior, actually signed an arms limitation treaty with the Soviet Union. And it looked like the Cold War was getting better. That arms limitation treaty was called SALT, Strategic Arms Limitations Talk. It's just SALT, an arms limitation treaty. And it looked like some of the most dangerous time of the Cold War was ending, going into the mid-1970s. I should add, a lot of conservative Republicans were calling him another Chamberlain in Munich. Don't worry, it would blow up again in the late 70s, and we'd almost blow the world up in 79 and 83. I know you're worried that the world might still be here. I can't believe we're still here. I'll tell you about 79. You won't believe 79.
So what was the
So it's simply a term for lessening of tensions in the Cold War. Any others? 72, 73. York, 2? Yeah. Page 2, Yorktown. And that's 1781, and that is the last battle of the Revolutionary War, where Washington led U.S. and French forces surrounded the British General Cornwallis at Yorktown. They surrounded Cornwallis, showing the disaster of the British Southern strategy. Yes, I know we did that a Southern strategy today in class, but the disaster of that, and that would be the last major battle of the Revolutionary War, Yorktown. There's important battles, but the only battles I've ever seen on the AP exam that I know of are Yorktown, the last battle, which was before the Treaty of Paris of 1783 in Saratoga. That's the only ones I've ever seen. I know there are other battles, like Antietam, Gettysburg. I've only seen those, and then attrition and total war. Yeah. Kansas, Nebraska, 1854, and page 6, 4. And that one was passed by Stephen Douglas, a Democrat from Illinois, and it was to set up governments in Kansas and Nebraska for a railroad. But to get Fire Eater, rabid Southern, to get the Fire Eaters to support it, Douglas had to repeal the Missouri Compromise and allow for popular sovereignty in Kansas and Nebraska. And that would trigger Bleeding Kansas and directly lead to the creation of the Republican Party as a free soil party. Remember, free soil was no slavery in the territories? Yes. Next.
New Look?
New Look on page 9. That is Eisenhower's idea to emphasize nuclear over conventional weapons. And his Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, would threaten nuclear war called brinksmanship a number of different times. But Eisenhower's goal was to emphasize atomic weapons to look tough on communism, so at the end of his term, he could have a peace agreement and actually cut defense spending, which of course kind of blew up in his face with the U-2. Any others? Yeah. The Pueblo Revolt on page 1. So that was a revolt in the 1670s and 1680s against New Spain, against Spanish rule in what is New Mexico. So around the Spanish town of Santa Fe. And this was a revolt by the remnants of the tribes there who have been devastated by disease against Spanish rule. And for about a decade, they were able to drive the Spanish out. But then the Spanish would brutally put down that rebellion and enforce them to basically become slave laborers. And the important thing to know about that is that showed that kind of Spanish had pretty strict dictatorial rule over the American Indians, and the opposition that American Indians had to being colonized. They did fight back a number of times, not just against the United States, but also New Spain, which that would have become New Mexico. Any others? Yeah. Page 10. So Johnson's reasons were to save the Great Society. He thought he had to look tough on communism. So the Voting Rights Act was literally just becoming a law. And so he thought he had to escalate to get the Voting Rights Act passed. The other two reasons were this. Voting Rights Act, JFK's legacy. John Kennedy made it important, and Kennedy was assassinated, and he didn't want that to be used against him by other Democrats. And lastly, credibility. He wanted to show that we are a credible defense of Europe, our European allies, especially Berlin, by defending our Asian allies, South Vietnam, which is a little bit hackneyed thinking because it's a totally different situation. And the credibility gap was this. He did it for credibility, and yet Johnson lied about the reason to get in the war and how difficult the war would be. So people came to not believe Johnson. And that's going to be called the credibility gap. The credibility gap. Because he lied about reasons to get in the war and lied about how costly the war was going to be. Johnson thought he could get away with anything. Some people do. Yeah. Watergate on page 10. And so that happened in 1972. And that's actually a series of over 30 charges against President Nixon and the Republican Party to try to use the powers of government to subvert the election, to try to overturn the election. 1972, over 30 charges. But Watergate gets its name from this. Nixon tried to secretly wiretap the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel. And those fools who did it were caught. I will tell you that story after the test. It's kind of amusing, but in a dark way. Nixon would attempt to cover it up by saying it was an FBI CIA operation. And he would win a big victory in 72, but it would come out because he had been secretly taping his Oval Office conversations. And eventually he'd be forced to release those tapes. He would have got away with it once for the tapes. And he would have been impeached, but he resigned in 74. But the big thing about Watergate is this. This is going to fuel more distrust of government and work into the hands of a conservative revival in the 70s. Don't trust the government. Don't trust government regulations. Partially because of Watergate, partially because of Lyndon Johnson, partially because of the Kennedy assassination. Any others? Yeah. Red Summer, page 5. Page 7, so I was completely off. Red Summer, and that happened right after World War I, and that's 1919. And those were the massive attacks on African Americans by mostly white mobs all over the United States. And obviously, because of the Great Migration, because of so many African Americans moving north for jobs. And it coincided with this growing nativism and the growth of the Ku Klux Klan. And of course, during this intensely racist time, African Americans are going to be blamed for this. And that's Red Summer. And so that will be used as an excuse to show to even further clamp down on rights for African Americans. Any others? Yeah, we have the Red Scare the same year as Red Summer. Red Summer was really for blood. Any others? Yeah. I'll do it. The Platte Amendment was 1898, and that was basically before the Spanish-American War, saying the United States would allow Cuba, or the United States would not colonize Cuba. Cuba would be independent. So implying that this war was not a war for conquest. But it never defined what that meant. And it never said the other areas the U.S. would conquer. In 1901, Congress would pass the Platte Amendment, which would make Cuba a protectorate, where the U.S. could dictate and control their governments. And also the base at Guantanamo Bay, a U.S. Navy base. The U.S. made Cuba accept this. And this would be an example of big stick diplomacy. I should add, the Platte Amendment will directly lead to the popularity of Fidel Castro in 1950, 1960, because of anger over the United States. Don't get me wrong, a lot of issues with Castro, but that's how come he stayed in power until 40 years. Any others? Yeah. So there are two really big assassinations that happened in 1968. In August 1968, Martin Luther King was assassinated while supporting a garbage workers strike in Memphis, Tennessee. He was assassinated by a guy named James Earl Ray. And there would be mass protests all over the United States because of this by African Americans. They call them race riots still. But a significant, this really helped fuel the conservative backlash. It's actually kind of terrifying to see all the interviews of mostly white men saying he deserved to be killed. And then in June of 1968, Robert Kennedy was assassinated just after winning the California primary for president. He was assassinated by a man by the name of Sirhan Sirhan. Sirhan, yes, that's his name. Just like it sounds, S-I-R-H-A-N. He was a Palestinian immigrant, and he was mad at Kennedy's pro-Israeli stance in the 1967 Six-Day War. But anyway, they're both assassinated. And so you can imagine how this kind of threw that summer of 1968 in absolute disarray. Kennedy probably wouldn't have got the nomination, but many people believe he did, and you could see how people immediately start seeing a connection between the two brothers being assassinated, which people still talk about to this day. Yes, it's Robert Kennedy's son, who is in his early 70s, who is running as an independent for president on basically an anti-vaccine campaign. That's basically his entire campaign. And he also just announced that he had a parasite worm in his brain that ate part of his brain. Moving on, anything else? Yes, that actually came out today. I'm not making that up. Yes. Basic diplomacy on page 5, 6. That's the name for U.S. economic imperialism, and it comes from Teddy Roosevelt, where the United States is going to control Latin America, best personified by like the Panama Canal and the Dominican Republic. Big stick diplomacy was economic imperialism in Latin America. And that's going to, so you have, all these things are tied into what's going to happen in Guatemala and Cuba. Hey, we went through a lot, didn't we? So, I promise I will review, so I'll do it one more time. I will 6 o'clock, and I'm going to go through a few more things about the essays, a few more things about the test. I will record it, so.
We have to do 1 through 6 more, and then just parts of 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, you have to show me you've done parts of it. And you've already shown me a lot because you're here.
I don't know why. Me too. That was the one that you had us assign in the review book.
Yeah, I just said, and what I said in the review book was things I didn't say in the class you have to get on your own. But you got it done. Yeah, come before first period. Yeah. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see ya. And so I will try to record tonight. I hope that helped.
Aren't you so excited to proctor a test for 2.5 hours?
I don't know.
What are you?
Teachers, they won't let teachers around you when you take the AP exam.
You have your car?